Hello everybody and welcome to Manga Book Club. It is January 2024 and we have just read two, may I say, bangers for the month. The first being Pluto by Naoki Urasawa and Takashi Nagasaki, and the second being Akumetsu by Yoshiaki Tabata and Yuki Yugo. I enjoyed both of these series thoroughly. I thought they were both really good. I ended up actually finishing both of them before halfway through the month because I was just very invested in reading them. They both have some very interesting problems as well, which we'll get to, but let's not fuss about with the ado. Let's crack into Pluto. The first manga we went through was Pluto by Naoki Urasawa and Takashi Nagasaki, written in 2003 to celebrate Astro Boy and the works of Tezuka. The plot revolves around Special Agent Gazette going on this big investigation into the Pluto killings. There is some creature out there, either human or robot, that is going through and killing off the world's 7 strongest robots and members of the Bora investigation squad, something that is tied together through a piece of history in the manga called the 39th Central Asian Conflict. Basically a big Iraq War parallel that's hard to miss. As the investigations go on, all of the strongest robots are killed off until eventually Atom is revived, our Astro Boy parallel in the story, who comes back to defeat Pluto once and for all and defeat the final villain who was secretly Bora the entire time. I found there was a lot of heart in this story. There was a lot of humanity. One of the big ideas being pushed by the manga is that these robots are very human-like. We are supposed to empathize with these robots and treat them as we would any other human beings. And I think the manga does a great job of conveying that, especially in the early chapters. After Robbie dies and Gazette takes his memories to his wife, that interaction is really heartbreaking, in my opinion. Especially with her design, because she can't really express her emotions. She can't show them on her face. She's stuck smiling as she gets these memories of her husband dying. That's heartbreaking. And then we get into some of the more genuinely heartbreaking moments of the series. Probably you would immediately connect to North 2's story, which is 3 chapters about him and Duncan sort of understanding their respective traumas and trying to overcome them together until North is abruptly killed, leaving Duncan alone. And watching him sing in the sky as he dies and Duncan waits for him, that's genuinely heartbreaking stuff. For me, the real punch was in the following death, in Brando's death. When Brando dies, he sinks down to the sea, believing that he's won the battle, and he slowly loses control of his brain. He starts thinking about his family, and he can't stop thinking about them. He wants to send his friends information on the fight, but all he can do is think about his family and the people he's leaving behind and the people he loves, and I'm genuinely tearing up a bit, because that moment is really strong. Urasawa does an amazing job in all his manga about taking small stories, these smaller characters, and giving them some big emotional hook that absolutely punches you. Later on, I think there's also an excellent sort of heartbreaking moment with Ali, as well as the robot dog. I did not remember the robot dog, but the robot dog almost made me cry because I was not expecting the little robot to try and get up and walk. And my heart, it's so sweet. We should probably talk about the plot because did anyone else get a bit confused? Because it's a bit confusing. For 3/4 of the manga, we're following the Pluto killings and trying to figure out who Abula is and trying to figure out who Pluto is as Gazette goes on this journey. And then Gazette dies, and the manga changes almost entirely. We are now following a story about Bora, who wants to blow up the world, and Goji is secretly Bora, and Abula is Goji and believes he's a human, but he's also Bora, and now there's a bomb, and Adam's back, and he's not okay, but he's actually okay, but he's not okay, but he's actually okay. I keep wanting to tangent to talk about chapters 47 onwards, because that ending chunk is a different manga to me, and it changes everything about Pluto and casts this massive shadow on what otherwise would be an amazing manga, because the ending isn't good. But let's talk about the plot first. What was the actual plot? What the heck was the teddy bear doing? Well, the general consensus is that the teddy bear was doing everything, that the teddy was in control the entire time, and everything that happened was this big circuitous plan on how to destroy the world. And I don't really agree with that. The way I read it, I think there was 2 plans going on. The first was to bomb the hell out of Persia because there was a brilliant AI being built, and Roosevelt the teddy bear was like, no, I want to be the strongest in the world. We'll just get rid of that problem. When the AI got built anyway, the situation changed. And so from then on, Roosevelt was like, okay, cool. This Bora, Goji, Abula guy wants to blow up the world. Bloody sweet, mate. I'll just sit back, do nothing, and let him do it for me. And that is what happens. I personally agree with that more than just Roosevelt was in control the whole time, because it's such a hand-wavy explanation to me. Oh, something doesn't make sense. Oh no, Roosevelt was doing something. This is all, it's all the plan. It's all the plan. 4D chess, mate. 4D chess. But no, I believe the story is more Abula Goji's plan, and Roosevelt is mainly just sitting on the sidelines for most of it, which makes him a really bad villain because he doesn't do anything in the story. And when you get to the ending, you get that little stinger at the end where Brow comes in and kills him, and we're all like, what? What's going on? It's bad because Roosevelt's a bad villain. So what was the actual plot? Well, this is how I would explain it. There was this big super AI being built in Persia. Roosevelt found out about it, influenced the world to go and bomb Persia. The robot gets built anyway, and then the robot goes on this big revenge quest to try and blow up everyone that attacked Persia. Mainly Thrashia, the 7 strongest robots, and the Bora investigation squad, even though they did nothing wrong apart from not make their findings publicly available. Maybe. We don't really know why no one agreed with the Bora investigation squad, or if their information ever got out. It's just kind of never explained. And the plot on paper is actually really good. I do like the plot beats in the story. The problem is that it's a manga of 2 halves, and the first half of the manga is really good. It sets things up, it pays things off, and then the second half of the manga proceeds to fumble all of the balls that were in the air. Pluto is a manga of 2 halves. Chapter 47 is where that manga changes. We have followed Gesicht through the whole story, and it makes sense from a planning perspective that Gesicht was going to die. That wasn't far from our mind. The world's 7 strongest robots are being killed off. Gesicht is one of those robots. Ipso facto, he's probably going to get killed at some point. The problem was, then we switched to an entirely new manga. Atom is now the main character, but he's not Atom anymore. He's something new that's been made from 6 billion different personalities, bundled together with something that activated him. We don't really know if it's Gesicht's memories or the emotions from Epsilon's death that awaken him. It seems like a mix of both, though the manga wants us to believe it's just Gesicht's death. Doesn't quite work. Anyways, the manga goes on, and now the plot is about Bora blowing up the world with an anti-proton bomb. The problem is, we don't really understand Goji and Bora. We don't really understand Atom now either, that he's revived. Maybe the worst chapter in the story is where Atom breaks out and everyone's like, oh my gosh, he's gone crazy. Extreme emotion from his resurrection has made him vengeful. He wrote this formula for a bomb. He's gonna do something horrible. And then Dr. Ochanomizu just goes outside and Atom is there in the rain and he's like, nah, I'm fine. And that is so disappointing because he's actually lying. If you read the rest of the manga, he's lying. He is still vengeful and angry. It's just sort of hidden in the background now. But he also shouldn't be, because if Gesicht's memories are what awoken him, Gesicht's final memories were of literally the opposite. Gesicht's final lines before he dies is literally, nothing will come from hatred. So why is Atom so vengeful then? I do not understand, because the manga doesn't really make sense past the halfway point. I'm working on a proper Pluto video now to slowly go through and more reasonably talk about topics instead of me just kind of ranting. And one of the things that happens once you hit chapter 47 onwards is you start saying the word somehow a lot. Oh, and then Bora got here somehow. And then Goji built this bomb somehow. And then Atom is feeling fine now because. And it feels really bad. And especially once you're looking at the ending in detail, you're like, none of this actually holds up too well. It's all a bit of a mess. The thing is, I think Urasawa does good jobs with his characters. So a lot of the times they're just kind of oversimplified. That is really the only criticism to make. They're generally really interesting and good. He does a lot with a little background. Then the issue is, when we get to the ending, we don't know the main characters anymore. Atom has changed. Bora is Goji, and we still don't really know what he's up to because he's kind of gone insane now after his personalities merged. And then we have Pluto, who we also never understand. We get that there's this Sahad AI in him. Okay, cool. We also get that he has magic powers because of the plot that's never explained either. Okay, but why is he stuck? Why is Sahad stuck in this AI? We don't know. Is he hateful, or is the AI just sort of making him hateful? Is that even him? We don't really know because the manga never really explains it. And it's such a shame because the manga is good. The art is good. The characters are good. But then chapter 47 hits and all of a sudden it's like all of the wheels fall off the car and we're trying to drive forward, but we hit the ground. And now we're trying to move forward sluggishly as we're out kicking with our legs to push the car forward. Sorry, getting heated about how bad chapter 47 onwards is. Why I get really frustrated about the ending is because the first 47 chapters of Pluto are excellent. It is arguably some of the best storytelling and some of the best work Urasawa has done. And the entire manga is completely undercut by those final 18 chapters. Those final 18 chapters take a beautiful story and throw it in the bin, quite frankly, and turn what could have been a masterpiece manga into one that's just good. As an adaptation of the original Tezuka story, it's fantastic. If you have read The Greatest Robot on Earth, it is amazing how Urasawa has taken that original concept and transformed it. There are moments in Pluto which directly parallel the original. So if you see Epsilon's death where he has the hands over Wassily, that is a direct shot from the original story. Likewise, in a lot of the designs, it's very clever, and also some of the things that don't really work. So the ending with Pluto and Atom teaming up to fight Bora, that's straight out of the original story, and something which didn't really translate well into Pluto, but kind of got included anyway because of reasons to keep it consistent. Likewise with Uran. Uran is in the original story, and she does play a surprisingly significant role because apparently Pluto wants to be friends with her. It's never really explained why, he just kind of does, and she's like, okay, yeah, we can be mates, and they sort of hang out. She doesn't really need to be in Pluto, but she's here anyway. And so sometimes it feels like, if you've read the original story, things are being added in for the sake of keeping consistent to the original story and not so much actually developing into a new story. There's also a number of real-world parallels in the story. Namely, some people beginning with K who have hoods, which I can't say the name of because I'm on this platform. Their inclusion in the story is odd. They did not need to be here. An anti-robot group makes a lot of sense. Robots recently got rights. People are generally pissy about new things happening. Sure, an anti-robot group makes sense. But to make them the Robo-K is just a bit on the nose, especially when we first meet them and they've literally got robots up on like makeshift crosses, and the main guy that we meet is called Adolf H. Like, it's a bit of a yikes in my book. Their inclusion is to make the robots a marginalized minority. Cool, yep, understand, makes sense. But to make them Robo-K, you've put in this weird subtext where robots are equated to ethnic minorities, and considering the end of the manga is all about how the president of the United States is being controlled by a robot, maybe we shouldn't make the relation between them and ethnic minorities. That's literal conspiracy stuff. I am curious to know how other people felt about the 39th Central Asian conflict, particularly about the Persian robot soldiers. So a big part of the manga is about seeing robots as human. We're supposed to empathize with them. We're supposed to feel that there is this tremendous weight on the world's 7 strongest robots for killing so many Persian robots. Did anyone reading actually empathize with the Persian robots? Because I never did. Even when we see that basement full of robot corpses, it's an idea that should be shocking based on the themes of the manga, but the manga never quite got across the humanity of the Persian robots. The co-author Nagasaki has literally said it's an anti-war manga. It's hard to miss. And one of the big problems with that is that we only really see the war from the side that attacked, not the side that was attacked. So all our Persian perspectives are King Darius, Sahad, and Goji Abdullah, which is a villain, half a villain, and a villain. So for an anti-war message, it is still vilifying the people being attacked. The people who attacked are still the good guys in the story. And our empathy for the robots, all the robots that died, comes through the killers feeling bad that they killed them. And that's one of the fundamental problems that I have with the depiction of the war in the manga. It's still very much on the side of the attackers. We're supposed to think that war is bad because all of these bad things happen. And one of those main bad things that are happening are all the 7 strongest robots are struggling with this trauma, which is very real and very sad. But it's the trauma about killing people. And we're empathizing with the killers rather than the killed. And that's a problem that never really gets addressed by the manga. The manga does not give us enough perspectives from Persia to really empathize with them. And the only ones that we get are the villains, and we're like, well, Persia kind of sucks. I really do think the manga should have done more to make Persia more empathetic. There are some clues later on that perhaps Persia isn't as bad as its early depictions made it out to be, but that's never really explored, and it should have been to make this whole anti-war message a lot more cohesive. One of the comments from CurryEXE says that Pluto is an amazing work, and I think some of the most memorable Urasawa characters. But in the long run, I don't really remember what it was about and what the Pluto motive was. Correct. I think that is a common reaction because the Pluto motivation doesn't actually exist. Pluto doesn't really have a motivation. He is Sahad's AI who has been manipulated somehow off-screen into this hateful monster who maybe is controlled by Abdullah, maybe influenced by Bora as well. We don't really know because Pluto himself is never fully explained. Likewise, the plot kind of jumps off a cliff after chapter 47, so we don't really follow the plot afterwards. At the end of the manga, you'd sit there thinking, what the heck was the plot? Because I was following it for those early chapters, but now I just don't really know. When did the bomb come in? There was a bomb? When did the anti-proton bomb come in? When did it get put into Bora? I don't understand. But they sum up by saying that it has one of the best casts of the Urasawa stories. I think widely, yes. For the main 7 robots, I would agree. Especially Gesicht. I think Gesicht's personal journey through the manga is one of the best that Urasawa has done. It is up there with... I want to talk about Billy Bat, but I know people haven't read it, and even talking about who the main character is a bit of a spoiler. So never mind. I'll just say one of the characters in Billy Bat. That one. You know the one I'm talking about if you've read it. He's great. Got some lovely comments from Ozil as well. They talk about the art. If I can just directly quote you here, buddy. It goes without saying that the art and presentation are incredible. Urasawa is nothing if not a master of his craft. The tableau of each corpse are equal parts devastating and beautiful, and the shadows of Pluto that haunt the story evoke genuine fear. I totally agree. I think the art in this is fantastic. If I can pull out a single panel, we're going to talk about the brow panel, because I think the brow panel is arguably the best in the entire manga. When Gesicht goes to meet Brow, we see that he is walled off. There is one single human guard guarding him and just all these cameras. And then we got to see him and he's in this underground bunker that's been walled off and there is this makeshift barricade all around him like no one's been here in a long time. And then we see him and it's this panel of seeing Brow half pinned to the wall, limbs splayed out, him half broken in pieces. It is a bit undercut by the rest of the chapter explaining everything that the art shows. I mean, the art shows that this character has been left here to rot. Something has gone horribly wrong, and he has been discarded and pushed to the back of society. And then very explicitly Brow goes, look, I've been discarded and pushed to the back of society. Look, they couldn't even take this spear out of my chest because it would kill me, and they couldn't even do that, the absolute cowardly humans. And it's like, no, we got that. We gathered from the fantastic one-page panel that you gave us. It's very clear Brow is something special and creepy and something that humanity has tried to leave behind, but literally can't bring itself back to finish off. Seriously, that Brow panel is chef's kiss. Ozil also talks a bit about science fiction ideas that are explored in Pluto. And it's hard to talk about some of the science fiction stuff because nowadays a lot has been done in science fiction. And I assume even back in 2003, a lot had been done with science fiction. I mean, the idea of a killer robot that has no fault, that is the plot of iRobot, which came out in the same year. That's not exactly a unique take to make. The question is, are its ideas sort of lessened by exposure? That now that sort of media has moved on, we've played around with these ideas more, are the messages of Pluto less engaging? I would say no. Despite having seen these ideas before, it is the execution that I'm interested in. And primarily it is the characters that are explaining these that are keeping me invested in moving on. I mean, the main theme of the manga is that you need to overcome the chains of hatred. Hatred leads to nothing. And that is a well-worn idea, especially in manga. If you've read like a lot of if you've read a lot of shonen and seinen, then you will be well familiar with the idea of friendship good, hatred bad, because that is the plot of like 80% of them. So even with some more classic ideas, I don't think it really takes away from what Pluto is. Ozil also points out the North 2 story, which is probably worth talking about on its own. For a lot of people, North 2 is what makes the manga the manga. It is the real memorable piece that ties the story together for them, even though it's 3 chapters of largely disconnected material. So one of the things that Urasawa is really good at, it's one of the biggest strengths of his writing, is to take a couple of chapters and then give a nice, simple but strong backstory to some characters and then explore their journey. And if you've read any of his stories, there is a bunch of them. Go and see any of the side characters in Monster, read the backstory of some of the main characters in 20th Century Boys when they show up late, or you can check out most of the first arc of Billy Bat. There's a lot of side stories in the first arc of Billy Bat. This is what Urasawa does. He's really good at these simple little stories that absolutely smack you in the face emotionally. And the North 2 story is a great example of that. That moment when he's up in the clouds singing as he dies. That's genuinely emotional. Watching Duncan's reaction as North dies and he can't even tell because he can't see. He just hears the singing fade out. That's so sad. Watching these 2 characters who we have just seen overcome their respective traumas and bond, and now they are set apart as one dies unceremoniously. And I think where it is placed is really effective in the manga. So it's placed as the second killing. So we have Mont Blanc, who we don't really know, and then we have a couple of chapters to get to know North, and to get to empathize with him, jump into his story, get along with this character, and then we watch him die. And one of the more interesting messages at the end of the manga is watching Atom beat the hell out of Pluto and going and thinking back about everyone who has died. And us as the reader, we're like, yes, this is some cathartic shit. Let's go. And it feels great watching Pluto get his absolute shit smacked. But the message of the manga remains the same. Hatred leads to nothing. We shouldn't be reveling in the death of Pluto, even though we still empathize so much with North and we want to see his killer have some comeuppance. We don't get that. We need to be a Gesicht and walk away. Ozzel also points out that there are a lot of ideas in the manga that don't necessarily get taken to their conclusion. One of the big ones being memory. Memory is such a big idea through the start of the manga. We have those moments of people exchanging memory chips. The moment that got me was when Gesicht asked Robbie's wife if she wanted the memories of Robbie removed. And she said no. She needs those memories. She wants those memories. It's like a part of him still lives on. Later on, we hear Hercules talk about how humans build monuments because they need to remember, and that robots don't forget. If they want to remember something, they will, and if they want to forget something, they have to choose to forget it. But some memories can't be forgotten, like we see in Gesicht's story. Those memories still haunt us subconsciously. It's really interesting to see the end result of what memory means in the story. Nothing. It means nothing. It doesn't go anywhere. Or likewise, the idea of racism against robots. I mean, this is the idea brought up with Robo-K, and where does that go? Oh, it goes nowhere. So there are interesting ideas, and it does suck that some of these really interesting ideas aren't taken to any sort of interesting conclusion at the end, but I will give the manga the credit of saying that it didn't really need to. It wasn't the purpose of this manga to explore those ideas. But then the counter-argument is, well, why raise those ideas in the first place if you're not going to go anywhere with them and just have them as sort of set dressing? But for me, I like having those sort of set dressing pieces. Not everything needs to be fully explored to its conclusion, but for things like memory in particular, I found the memory one quite compelling because that is an idea that is explored enough and is explored through the manga right through to the end, talking about how extreme emotion and those memories that get put into the super AIs are what make them into the people that they will become. Memory seems really important until at the end, it just doesn't really conclude or go anywhere. Though I personally don't hold it too hard against the manga. Okay, a bit more on the ending. I think Pluto is the only manga that I have ever read that I will say this about. It needed to be longer. That last quarter of the manga needed to be 3 times as long. It should have been the last half, not the last quarter. To properly explore the ideas that the ending wants to present, there isn't enough support by the time Gesicht dies. We don't really know what Atom is doing. We don't really know what Bora is doing. We don't really know what Pluto is doing. And now there is this new plot about blowing up Thrashia and the world. And it feels incredibly left field because not enough had been built up, and in the time that it's got left, not enough is explored. Even in the ending, we are still going through Gesicht's backstory, a character who is gone, and those chapters would have worked really well. I mean, those chapters do still work really well in isolation, but they don't work as part of the ending. They should not be there. They do not add to this idea of overcoming the cycles of hatred. So then we get these very confusing chapters about Atom reawakening, and he's supposed to be evil and vengeful, and he writes this anti-proton bomb formula straight out of nowhere. And then all of a sudden, he knows the plot as well, which no one else really knew, and he knows all about Goji and Abula, which is very strange. Then he escapes, and Dr. Uchinomizu's like, oh my gosh, he's gone! We need to do something! He's gonna be evil! But then he just finds him in the rain, and Atom's like, I'm a good boy again, I'm sorry. It gets me genuinely angry. That chapter gets me genuinely mad. So in Urasawa stories, I cling to the characters. This is the main thing that I'm following. And when Atom is reawakened, we don't know who he is anymore. He's technically a new AI, like 6 billion personalities merged together with some extreme emotion. And the extreme emotion, we don't actually know what it was, because it's supposed to be based off of Gesicht's final memories. That's kind of the idea of the manga, but right before he wakes up, it's the memories and the feelings of Epsilon's death coming down to him. And Uron lays that out real clearly. It's like, oh, this big sadness just fell on Atom right before he awoke. So Atom wakes up and he makes this big formula. Who is he? We don't know. And it's so frustrating because he goes out and acts like a little bit of an edgelord for a day. And then he's like, no, it's okay, I'm good. And then does a bunch of good things. And then he goes off to the final battle. And all of a sudden he's, no, my hate is more powerful than your hate, Pluto. I'm the hate master here. And then they get into their fight. And it's like, who are you? I just don't know what your character is anymore, because You weren't the main character. We barely got to know you before, and now we still don't know who you are, and you're being overtly contradictory. This is my big problem when I get to the ending. I don't know who Atom is. Pluto, we also don't know what the heck he's doing. There is a Sahad AI in him, but he's not fully Sahad, and Sahad was never, hateful or vengeful, and for some reason, he gets the final kill against Bora, who we don't know about either. Who is Bora? Goji and Abula and Bora are all kind of one person now, and they've also gone insane. And we don't know what on earth he's doing. He wants to blow up the world, but doesn't for some reason. He just kind of sits and hangs out and waits to be stopped. And then we get to the actual final ending. And this is in two parts. So the first part is Pluto sends off Atom to go and solve all of the problems by himself. Okay, cool. Yeah, no worries. I guess all of that stuff that we set up about Sahad wanting to fill his country with flowers, never mind. We're not going to do any of that. Sahad is going to go off screen and defeat Bora and defeat the anti-proton bomb and also use his magical powers, because he has magical powers in the manga, to go and save the world. It is very easy to not like this ending because it, 1, happens off screen, 2, happens because Pluto has magic powers, and 3 is just a big anticlimax. Pluto just solves the problem because he can. Those last couple of panels, I will give credit. I think those last panels are genuinely quite nice. There's that moment of Atom standing in the snow and looking up at all of the other robots who have died before him. And that is very reminiscent of the original story. And I think that is a beautiful shot. It's also very on the nose in regards to the theme, as Atom quite clearly lays out the theme of the story. And I think that's honestly a nice place to end. And if the ending parts had been better, this would be a beautiful ending. Sadly, it's lessened by what has come directly before it, and that would be a beautiful spot to end. And then Urasawa does it again. He did it in the original of 20th Century Boys. He goes and does a little stinger at the end to make it a little interesting, exciting ending instead of the heartfelt ending. And so we get the moment of Brow coming in to kill Dr. Roosevelt. And this bugs me because I've read the manga. I know the manga quite well. And Roosevelt is not built up to just be the bear. Roosevelt is the massive supercomputer that he sits in front of. So when Brow comes in and throws his spear at the teddy bear, the computer lives on. Like the mouthpiece, you have killed off the mouthpiece, but the big robot that made all of this happen, that's still alive. That's still kicking under Thrashia. And Brow says if he pulls the spear out, he dies. So nothing has been achieved. Also, it's unclear because Atom does send out Brow to go and do this. We never get a context of why he did that, or what the specifics of that were. Was he expecting him to go and kill a bunch of people in Thrashia to get in there? We just don't really know. So I don't like the stinger ending. I think this was a plot thread that did need ending. Something needed to happen to Roosevelt at the end, and pulling in Brow was a nice idea. I don't think it's executed very well because Brow just shows up in the middle of Thrashia somehow. But to have it as the stinger after a very nice and natural ending point that wraps up the characters and the story and the themes, that shot of Atom in the snow, that really should have been the final panel. And so having that stinger at the end, not a fan. So that was Pluto. Overall, I did enjoy the story. I think it is still a good story and one I would recommend. The problem is that the ending completely makes me lose passion for the manga. That last quarter, that last third, is just a real wet fish after a beautiful first 2/3. If you've got more thoughts, feel free to drop them in the comments. I am working on that long Pluto video, which is almost finished scripting. It is 25,000 words, and it's taken me way too long. Sorry, it is coming out. But if you've got thoughts, drop them in, because this will be a last chance to get them in that script. Next up, we've got Akumetsu. The second story we went through was Akumetsu by Yoshiaki Tabata and Yuki Yugo, published from 2002 to 2006. Akumetsu is about this character who has taken it upon himself to bring about the end of evil in Japan, particularly political evil, those who are taking public funds and using them in irresponsible or straight up greedy ways. The end result being an almost complete annihilation, shall we say, of so much of Japan's political system. So what do I think of this manga? I love this manga. I also hate this manga. I'm in such two minds about this manga. I have read it before, and so this was a reread for me. And personally, I felt it much stronger on a reread. A lot of the things I thought weren't set up, like the actual background of Sho and his connection to those characters that influence his backstory, that's set up a lot more than I remember it being. Likewise, I remember the first time I went through this manga, I was incredibly stuck on the actual, I guess, ethics and morals of the Akumetsu itself, which is something which will be a sticking point for a lot of people, I assume. So the plot of the story is that Akumetsu is killing off all these politicians. Each of the politicians attacked are overtly villainous. They are caricatures of real people. They are wearing panties on their heads. They are saying horrible things. They're like, I am so greedy. I've taken so much money because I love money. And it can be a bit much. But I also think the manga needs to make them overly caricaturized, because the other side of the coin is that the manga doesn't really criticize Akumetsu enough for what he's doing. Criticisms do come, but they're not really enough to assuage the point that Akumetsu is kind of making. Because Akumetsu is essentially making the point that the Akumetsu is good. It is a good thing that the Akumetsu has happened. And as someone who has read the book, I totally disagree. I think Akumetsu is idealistic, but he is not a hero. What do we mean by that? The entire plot revolves around murder being a good thing. And maybe I'm just some simp normie, but I, for one, think that it's embrace yourself for a controversial take, because I think killing is bad. I mean, we just went through Pluto. It's all about how the cycle of hatred kills us all. Instead of overcoming our hatred, Akumetsu is a story of what happens when we embrace our hatred, when we go to those responsible and just annihilate them. We can get more into the actual moral messaging of the manga later on, but let's talk about the best thing about Akumetsu. And you already know what it is. It's the style. Oh my gosh, the style of this manga is fantastic. Oh my god. There are so many times, especially in the early chapters, where Akumetsu will come along and do something, and I am like, that is one of the coolest things I've seen in my life. I am so on board. Horrible things are happening, but I am so freaking entertained by how this is presented. Every single page is such a feast for the eyes. Even if my brain is like, not too sure about the moral and political implications of what you're saying, my eyes are going, oh my gosh, I want more. Give me more. This looks so good. And that is one of the big reasons why Akumetsu is such a good read, because I am actively enjoying the art of reading. I am so entranced in this story because it is communicated so well. I may have issues with the actual plot, but the communication of that plot is top tier. The artist absolutely nailed this manga from start to finish. Even in the smaller designs of Ametsu-kun, or just some of how the elaborate devices of revenge are depicted. Like the car race is cool. Being outside the police station with all the motorbikes, that's cool. The big mech jetpack Akumetsu, that just looks cool, and it's tickling this part of my brain that's like, you can just sit back and enjoy this. It's fun. You're allowed to just sit back and enjoy a cool manga every now and then and not have to think too hard about the politics. The other part to really love about this manga is the tone. The tone is phenomenal. I mean, it's mean-spirited and it's angry, but I think that's fantastic. You can just feel Tabata's dissatisfaction ooze in every page. He's so pissed off at a system that he doesn't like, and you can feel that in every word, in every page. It's so evocative. Tone is like secret sauce of manga. It makes something that could be really average into something phenomenal. One of the questions we have through the manga is, how on earth is Akumetsu doing this? And it is functionally important, because one of the things that he says relatively early on is that he wants to be a martyr for the country. And we don't really know what that means, because yes, he seems to die, but he comes back. And we don't know for most of the manga whether or not he is a martyr for the country. We don't know if he's actually dying or if he's just being teleported and coming back. Is the mask shifting his consciousness somewhere? Eventually, right near the end of the manga, we learn that he's a clone, that he's got a cloning facility, and that, yes, these people are actually dying and being killed off. Okay, cool. Yeah, awesome. Cleaned up. And looking back with that revelation, going through the story again with that revelation, I should say, it makes a lot more sense. Though I still particularly have an issue with one of the underlying concepts, which is one kill, one death. The idea that for each person Akumetsu kills, he will kill himself as well. There is something insincere about that idea when you own a cloning machine and can make more of yourself. One of the reasons death is so terrifying is because that person is gone. You don't have any version of that person left. They are gone. That is one of the reasons why death is hard. And that is not the case for Sho, because he comes back. He comes back again, and he comes back again. So the idea of one kill, one death is undercut by the main plot of him being able to come back. Maybe I just don't like endings, but I feel like Akumetsu's, I didn't get into that one either. The whole cloning backstory and the plot of Sho's progenitor, it just feels like a different manga. How there was all these clones, and then there was the mega clone who went and wiped out all the regular clones, and now there's a few clones left who have come together to make more clones and destabilize Japan. It's just a really strange addition to have in the story. Yes, it kind of connects into the Yakuza guys, but the whole backstory with this mega clone and there was an evil scientist, etc., that feels like a different manga, right? Like, that feels like it does not belong in the Akumetsu story. It's just very strange. Likewise with the story about his dying friend, which admittedly was built up to more than I thought, but still not enough for the impact that that character should have on Sho and the story. It's actually crazy how quick Sho became radicalized by his friend dying. Like, he immediately turned to, I'm just going to destroy all of Japan's government. My friend died. I got to do this. Sorry, mate. I mean, strong reaction. You're grieving. I get that. But for every single Sho to go, yeah, let's ruin Japan. Let's go. I think the intention is that each of the different shows each had their own version of Katsuragi, where someone in their life was disadvantaged or has died or something has happened as a result of this corrupt government system. And that Katsuragi is really the straw that broke the camel's back, and that was the point where they all say, okay, yep, Japan's gotta go. And to that end, it does kind of make sense, though that isn't really explored too far in the manga. And I think it did need more time to be explored. The Akumetsu is a big deal, and you need a big history and big motivations to go and do something like that. And yes, that is a bad scenario that Sho has in his past, but that doesn't feel like enough to go and destabilize an entire country. But let's talk a bit about Sho himself. On the one... Again, I love this manga. I hate this manga. On the one hand, I really like Sho. He's cocky, he's confident, he's fun to follow around. And on the other hand, I absolutely want to smack him in his stupid, arrogant face. Apart from one situation, he does not get a comeuppance. There is one part where the mafia is introduced and a bunch of Shos get their comeuppance, particularly one who was kidnapped. That was strangely cathartic for me, seeing this character who gets every break in the manga, who seems to succeed in every single thing he tries, finally fail. I was like, yes, some vulnerability. Because Sho is a Mary Sue. I mean, he's one that is justified in the story, but he still is a Mary Sue. He just can do everything. You want him to be able to fight good? Yeah, he can do that. He's a television personality? Yep, he can do that. He's a professional level driver? Yes, he can do that. To the manga's credit, it explains why he can do all those things. This is a side effect of his cloning powers. He can go learn all these activities, and then when that Sho dies, pass on those memories to the next generation. So each subsequent generation is even more stronger and even more perfect. Okay, cool. That it kind of explains, but there's a difference between explaining the Mary Sue and excusing the Mary Sue. I think Akumetsu explains it fine, but I still am frustrated by this character who can seemingly do anything. And that's the other problem I have about that backstory in particular. So Sho goes off. He's like, okay, cool. We're going to make this big Akumetsu plan. Everyone go away and learn some skill. We'll come together. And then once we've reunited and made some more clones, we'll be able to do the Akumetsu with all of these new skills that we've learned. And so some of them go into driving and cooking and martial arts and stuntman training. We never hear of a single Sho going into politics. And that is such a frustration for me reading this manga. Sho has such a negative and vitriolic attitude about the Japanese government, and not one of them decides to, I'm actually going to go and learn about the system that I'm criticizing. Instead, they just think they understand it and decide to do something about it from their limited perspective, having never been in politics. And that really rubs me the wrong way, because I think there is a lot of things that people don't know about and choose to judge. And there's a classic line of, you shouldn't judge what you don't understand. And Sho is just the perfect example of that. He doesn't really understand how the political system works, but he knows enough to be angry. And don't get me wrong, politicians suck. I think most people around the world will look at their government system and be like, yeah, most of these are a pack of dogs. I don't want to have any contact with any of them. None of them really care. That's, most political systems. But to do something like the Akumetsu with no political grounding at all, it gets me really frustrated. So the manga does take a couple of moments to explicitly call Sho out, and they are never completed. So someone will come up to Sho and be like, you've just killed off all these people and you've encouraged privatization. What happens when our foreign nations come in and start buying up Japan's waters or Japan's roads? What happens when our infrastructure is owned by a foreign nation? That's going to have huge political consequences in how we trade with them, in what our armies can do. It is such a geopolitical issue. And Sho goes, "Nah, that's your problem. I'm just doing this. I'm doing the whole fun killing side of things. You can deal with all the hard stuff." Because he doesn't understand the system he is dismantling. And it is incredibly frustrating to read because other people make excellent points. Yes, what happens when you kill off all these systems and no one wants to take their place? What happens when no one wants to be a politician in Japan anymore? What happens when foreign influences come in and take over positions of power because you have left this big opening where only people with foreign backing will want to go in and do it? What happens when neighboring superpowers like Russia or China decide to come in and completely take over your political system because it's been dismantled? The thing is, he doesn't know and he has no plan, and so he's just kind of hoping everyone else will sort out the country once he makes a mess of it. The country is a mess, and he decides to make a different mess and just walk away, believing that other people will have an easier time cleaning up the second mess because he's fixed the first mess. And that's not how it works. You can't just go in, say job done after making another mess by turning one mess into a second mess. That's not how this works, Sho. It's part of the reason why I really don't like him as a character overall. If a single Akumetsu went into politics and there was some actual nuanced discussion around, yeah, there's going to be some struggles in the transition, but here is like XYZ of like how we could facilitate a better tomorrow. Nah, not part of the plan. And I think it really stems from the author's perception on the Japan debt crisis and how he is very angry about society and about people at the top taking advantage of people at the bottom. And fair enough. I feel like most people are like, yeah, rich people who take advantage of poor people suck. Throw them into the sun. And the manga is very cathartic with that in mind. I consider Akumetsu, I would describe it as, you know when you go to bed and you just dream you have superpowers and you're like, I'm going to go around and fix the world's problems because I have superpowers. And you kind of drift off to bed thinking about that. That's what Akumetsu is in a much more violent and angry and bitter way. Someone believing that they have the answers to the world's ills and deciding to do something about it. Though Akumetsu comes from a place of genuine hostility and anger at a system. As far as the plot goes in this story, I don't actually dislike it. For the start of the manga is just, here are some bad guys, here's their story, here is some Saw-esque trap that they have to get out of, which is very entertaining for us at home. And that's really fun, I won't lie. I'm having a great time watching these horrible people get their comeuppance, completely, neglecting the messages that we should have learned in Pluto. But then by the time we hit the roading section, where it's the race and it's the guy who gets buried alive, that is about halfway through the manga. Well, sort of halfway, 2/3. And this is where the manga sort of starts to slow down and has to pivot into the backstory as we get into the medical arc, going into the tainted blood being pumped into people. That switch needed to happen at some point because we needed to get into Sho's backstory with his friend that died, and that's the natural sort of connection point to it. But by that point, the story has kind of played out its best moments. There is the second Akumetsu, and when he gets put on stage to have to kill someone with the police at the start, that's all fun. By the time it gets to those sort of later killings, it's kind of lost its luster. It also feels like the author wasn't really keeping track of his story so much as he wanted to tell this interesting and exciting and bitter tale about how angry he is about politics. And one of the things that really stands out to me is Sho's girlfriend, who might not actually be his girlfriend, but maybe is his girlfriend, the lady from the first chapter. It's not uncommon for manga heroes to completely forget about their girlfriends, but for Sho, I really dislike how this first chapter sets him up vis-a-vis his girlfriend. Basically, she's selling herself to pay off her father's debts, and Sho goes and rescues her by attacking the guys. And then afterwards, she's like, oh my gosh, I'm heavily traumatized because, well, one, I had to do this, but two, you just came and brutally murdered people in front of me. And Sho's like, no problem, babe, bye, and then just walks off. What a Talk to the lady. Tell her that you're sorry. Help her with her struggles that you have now put inside her. Let me just give you some PTSD, baby. Now I'm gone. Piss off, Sho. And then the manga forgets this character exists until right near the end when the school gets invaded. And the manga's going to be like, she's important again. Think about her. She's great. And meanwhile, we're like, no, Sho has clearly shown no interest in her through most of the manga. In fact, there's been another girl who's kind of been like an interest. I don't really know, but she's had way more screen time than the girlfriend character. And then at the end, Sho's going to give his life for the girlfriend. And it's like, wow, it's so beautiful, right? No, because that relationship was never established. So it's things like that that really make me think that Tabata did not have a good handle on his story. Let's talk about the last chapter in particular. So I'm not a big fan of how Akumetsu ends in general, but the last chapter feels like a slap in the face. So the end of the manga is with Sho's girlfriend, who has been revived because he apparently was in love with her so much the whole time and really cares about her, and this is really important, and this makes sense. She's interviewing the ex-prime minister, who was the prime minister around when Sho was doing the Akumetsu. And it's said that Sho's war achieved almost nothing. The reforms that got put in place achieved almost nothing. On the one hand, I really like this because I think the Akumetsu as a theory is really short-sighted and does not take into account the various complexities of geopolitics. Very big issue, a lot of moving parts, and a very angry, simple solution like the Akumetsu does a lot more harm than good to a nation. But to hear at the end that it was all for nothing, that nothing came of it, the world chugged on, nothing was achieved, nothing, the story amounted to nothing. So on the one hand, I totally agree. It should amount to nothing. On the other hand, why did I read this story then? I'm entertained, but now it's like everything I read was for no point whatsoever. If the point was to vilify the whole Akumetsu, why did you make it so cool? Like, you made the Akumetsu a really interesting and fun thing to follow along, and you have justified it multiple times in the story, and then in the final chapter, it's all of a sudden like, nah, Akumetsu didn't really work, things aren't better, moving on. What was the point of the story then? Here's a literary question for you. Does every story need a theme? I would say no. But stories are made a lot better by having a cohesive narrative that has a point. And I don't think Akumetsu says anything. What Akumetsu more feels like is an author who is very angry at the state of the world, and he is unleashing all of his emotion into his art, and it makes it really interesting and evocative to follow. But the story itself does not have a point in the end, and that is really disappointing to get to that ending and realize that. It also raises another criticism I had about the Prime Minister. So the Prime Minister is overtly seen colluding with Akumetsu. That's made public knowledge. Akumetsu is pretty clearly saying that the reforms that the Prime Minister wants have to go through. And yet the country says, let's keep that guy in power. He shouldn't be, put on a break. He shouldn't put on leave of duty because clearly there is some outside interference that needs to stop to make our democracy work. We've probably talked about some of the reasons why the Akumetsu is bad. I am not a politician. I am not someone who's interested terribly in politics. But I can tell you, even from my negligent perspective, there are so many problems. How about when you kill off everyone in politics, no one wants to be a politician anymore because the risk of death. What happens when you start killing off and destabilizing your country? All of a sudden, no one wants to trade with you anymore. What happens to all the money that the bad guys took? If they were still alive, you could get that money back, but now that money will be transferred down and transferred out into different places. Do you think the families of those people that died are going to stay in Japan? Nah, they're going to take all that money that they got through inheritance and leave. Congratulations, all the money that was stolen is now gone for good. If you are an international creditor and you see this happening in Japan, you call in your debts. I mean, you want to get paid ASAP. You've just made the Japan debt crisis far more imminent and worse. What happens when you privatize all your businesses and you don't have any public services? That means that profit-making companies own all your services. So things that should be cheap and should be for public good are all of a sudden you have to pay for them all. Hope you like paying an arm and a leg for water. What happens if someone like your close neighbor China or Russia come in and purchase all of your natural water supplies and all of your water infrastructure? Cool, now they own it all. What if they put the price up? What are you going to say? They own it. They're allowed to do that. You've given them the power. The whole Akumetsu seems incredibly short-sighted, and the end of the manga quite succinctly wraps that up in saying, yeah, it was. This whole time that was a bad idea. Then why write a story where the Akumetsu is so damn cool and never genuinely criticized until the final page where you say, nah, actually it was bad the whole time. Bloody got 'em, boys. So taking issue with some of the more moral or ethical implications of the Akumetsu, does that ruin the manga? No, I don't think it does. Again, I think that complicated ideas or ideas you disagree with are still available and should be put in our stories. Because I don't agree with them doesn't make them bad, it just makes them something I'm less inclined to come back to. The fact that Akumetsu can pull off this story with such flair and such vibe and such fervor, it's got me so invested. I think it goes lengths to say how good this series is, because it so evocatively communicates its message. You might not agree with the message, but you damn well have a great time following this message. I think it's a great explanation of how much passion can get us on board. The idea of the Akumetsu doesn't really grab me, but the passion in both Sho as a character, but just in the presentation of the manga gets me so involved. So yeah, it's a manga I recommend, but it's one you've got to take with a grain of salt, because this is one of those manga that I see. How do I say this politely? Yeah, so I do recommend this manga, but it's one that I kind of struggle to recommend to, well, you know, those guys who have been online for a bit too long and have started to get some spicy opinions about life. Yeah, this is not the manga for them, because anyone who thinks that Sho is correct and good and the moral pillar of virtue in the story, yeah, I don't think they've been reading the correct responses into this story. Sho is not the hero. He's the main character. Sho is trading in one mess for another mess and saying, job well done. And the end of the manga is quite clear in saying, nah. What Sho has done does not amount to anything good. And that is all for Book Club for January 2024. Thank you for jumping along, team. This is a project that's very much in flux, and if you have opinions on its style change, if you don't like the more improvisation, if you don't like the more kind of winging it nature, then rad, let me know. We're still figuring out how to put things on screen and how to discuss stories like this. The main part is really just having a structure to read manga more and having a chance to hear people's opinions before talking about those mangas. Because a lot of the time at the moment on the channel, it's let me talk about this manga, and then people will comment some really interesting opinions and things I wish I had had been discussed before I made the videos that they are commenting to. So this is kind of my workaround for that. The votes are in. Next month we are, in fact, doing, I didn't actually check, bibbidi-bobbidi-boo. Pretty sure it was Berserk. Let me just hit the old double checky here. Yes, Berserk, clear winner, 60%. Well done, y'all. And good job, Manga 3, for also doing well. Sorry about getting the polls wrong. I have 0 IQ some days. Sorry, yes, I am still working on the Pluto video. That is almost done. So this is your final chance to get comments in if you do want something about that video in there. Thanks, everybody. This has been a blast. We will catch you in February, where we will be talking about Berserk. We'll see you G's then. Y'all, I recorded this whole thing, and I got myself in front of a camera, and then apparently 10 minutes in, my camera decided to die and not record the last however many long minutes this got. So I get to have fun editing all of this instead of just me wibbling about in front of a camera. So apologies. That was my intention, but hopefully this is visually interesting as well. Plus, I just feel like my voice makes more sense when I'm being stupid and expressive, as I am in real life when I talk like these. Anyways, just wanted to let you know that was a plan. I had the camera, I had my room set up, it was pretty cool. Got my screen on some cool backgrounds, which hopefully made their way into the video. But anyways, apologies. We'll let's see if I can get that figured out, but next time, maybe. I don't know. We'll play it by ear, baby.